Hello everyone, I'm Michael Serapio. Canada and the United Kingdom share a long history with each other, a relationship that spans centuries that includes standing side by side in times of war and working jointly on several fronts in times of peace. Recently, I had a chance to sit down with Britain's High Commissioner to Canada, Susannah Goshko, to talk about where the relationship stands today and where it might go in the future, as two of the world's oldest parliamentary democracies face global forces that challenge our mutual security and our mutual prosperity. Here now is our conversation with Her Excellency Susannah Goshko in Profile. Excellency, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You know, something important happened from the time you and I first talked about coming together for an interview, and that is the rather sad news that you are going to be leaving Canada. You're wrapping up your time as High Commissioner to this country. How do you feel when you consider that this is essentially the last few weeks of your time here?
Well, it's been a huge privilege to be here. What a great job this is. And I thought I would be spending 4 years here, but as is the way with diplomatic life, something else has come up and I'm moving on to another appointment. But I will look back on my time in Canada with tremendous fondness, actually. I knew at the point that I got this job that it was going to be one of the best of my career, and it has turned out to be that way. So sad to leave, but with incredibly fond memories for a really, truly spectacular country.
Well, we will be sad to see you go, and I know you cannot say where you're going next, not at this point. But you know, arguably, you do leave on a high. You leave at a time when the UK High Commission now has a new complex in Ottawa. You oversaw that process. You even oversaw the coming of the Red Arrows, the Royal Air Force precision team that flew over for the opening. That must leave you with a sense of pride as you're leaving Canada.
Well, it's been a tremendously fun summer. So, as you said, we've inaugurated our High Commission building, which is the greenest in our diplomatic network. We're really proud of that. And it was a deliberate decision to build our greenest building here in Canada as a testament to the work that we do with Canada on climate change. And it's a brilliant bespoke building that reflects the way that diplomatic missions operate these days, with a lot more interactive space and a space to bring in people from the community as well. So I am really proud of that. And then, as you say, we've had a summer of public diplomacy, which the most visible demonstration of that has been the Red Arrows, our RAF team, who've been over here to celebrate the Royal Canadian Air Force's centennial. They've done a 5-week tour of Canada, which they've called the Maple Hawk Tour, which has been to a number of different spots in Canada. But we've also done a number of other things this summer. We've had a really big presence at TIFF, for example, with lots of brilliant British films there. And we had Wrexham, the football team, over on the West Coast earlier this year. And as you may know, Wrexham is owned by your very own Ryan Reynolds. So it's been a brilliant year of public diplomacy for the UK and Canada, bringing us closer together.
And also perhaps another legacy piece in that Earnscliffe, the official residence of the British High Commissioner, is now starting to undergo renovations.
That's right. And we're very lucky with Earnscliffe because it is, of course, your first Prime Minister's house. So we're conscious that we own a little bit of Canadian history, and so we really want to do our best by looking after that. And we've finished the High Commission building. It took a few years to do that, and so we're turning our mind now to what we can do with Earnscliffe, the residence, and really thinking about both what we can do to future-proof it so that it's, you know, good and fit for the next 50 years, but also to see whether there are things we can do to make it more energy efficient, for example. We've built a new building that is the greenest building in our network, and now we're asking ourselves, is there something we can do with Earnscliffe to make that an energy efficient building as well?
Well, we look forward to see what it looks like at the end of the day. Although, you know, all of this speaks to the very fact that Canada and the United Kingdom not only have a shared history, but we as two countries have shared values, often talk about a shared future. But I think when you ask the average Canadian, it's a relationship they don't really reflect on much these days. So as a bit of a starting point on that, how does the United Kingdom view Canada and the relationship?
Well, I think you've captured the essence of it, which is the relationship is automatic. We see the world in the same way. I was so struck after I got here about how similar our values and approaches are, how similar the way we live our lives are. I think there is a natural affinity between people from the UK and Canadians that it's really hard to overstate. And it really runs through everything we try and do here. It makes it very easy to collaborate, whether that's businesses working together, whether that's in the science space, whether that's in the policy space. There's just so much similarity between our systems that we find it very easy to do things here. I would say with that comes a risk that we just collectively assume that it works and we don't tend the relationship. And so I've been really conscious over the last 3 years to think, what does that look like? How do we really mindfully build the relationship for the future and not just be complacent about the strength of the links between the countries already?
Well, let's build upon that, because you talk about the partnerships that the UK, Canadian entities have entered into, and we look at areas of technology, research and development. This past year, signing an agreement to work together on areas like artificial intelligence, semiconductors, and clean energy. Why partner with Canada? The shared values and history aside, why Canada on those matters?
Well, look, Innovate UK, which is our innovation arm of the UK government, invests more money in Canada than anywhere else in the world. And the reason they do that is because of the level of expertise and research being done here and the similarity in the values. And so that really does make us natural partners. We've both got brilliant people doing brilliant research and making huge advances in fields that are going to be critical to our future security. But we just, that bit about the similarity of our systems, the similarity of our universities, the natural links between them mean that we are natural partners to work together. And so there's just an instinct to collaborate with Canada. And I think another part of it is that Canada is very collaborative by nature. You're not a country that says we'll just do all of this on our own. You're looking for people that you can work with. And I hope that I'm right in saying that Canadians instinctively feel the UK is a good partner as well.
Mm-hmm. So much so that the UK has partnered with this country to look at the impacts of climate change in the Canadian North. Why is that of interest to the UK?
Well, climate change is of interest to all of us, but the particular project you're talking about is one that I'm really proud of. So it's a collaboration between UKRI, which is UK Research and Innovation, and the Canadian government, including the government of Quebec as well, with the ITK. And what that does is it looks to bring together modern technology along with traditional knowledge. And so we're looking at things that people who've lived in the High North know about their systems and know about the place they live, and that they can bring, working on projects that they have chosen and selected, to really marry those two things together and see if we can make advances, bringing together the sort of modern technology with the customary knowledge that has built up over years.
Mm-hmm. Well, and when you talk about that project in particular, a couple of thoughts come to mind. One has to do with security, but I want to begin actually with the environmental aspect of it. When it comes to climate change, of course, Canada and the United Kingdom among countries that are responding to the crisis in various ways. How do you see Canada and the UK working together on that front?
Well, we work together in a number of different ways. So internationally, for example, we've worked really closely around the COP process. We hosted COP26 in Glasgow, for example, and your Prime Minister was tremendously helpful in helping seal the deal that we managed to achieve in Glasgow. We collaborate on what we can do to help other countries who are setting ambitious goals on climate. There's a number of different things we do, but equally we're collaborating on some of the technology that might be needed to make the advances that we need to make to hit those emission goals. And so we're both founding members of the Powering Past Coal Alliance, for example, and there's a huge amount going on that's both about the international piece and trying to shape the international environment in which these decisions are being taken, but also about that research to research collaboration on helping us invent and drive some of the solutions to the problem.
Mm-hmm. Which is all very enthusiastic and very positive thinking, except, I do also wonder, because in this country, for example, there is a debate right now about the future of the carbon tax.
if it changes, it would come with a change in government. What is it like? How does it change any of the positive feelings, and I wonder if it does at all, when a policy as important as that is now being debated and perhaps a direction will change if there's a change in government?
Well, I probably won't insert myself into that particular political argument, but let me just say this. Every country will take the decisions it needs to take on how it meets its emissions reductions targets. But we need to be clear about two things. One, that if we don't take action now on climate, the science on this is absolutely clear. If we don't take action now on climate and do the things that we need to do, the costs further down the line are going to be significantly higher. And that's not just in monetary terms. We know, for example, that delaying by 10 years the work we need to hit net zero in the UK would double the costs of doing that. So there is a real financial impact of not taking action. But it's also in terms of the security challenges that will present for us as the world becomes increasingly inhospitable and people start to worry about their own livelihoods. I know, for example, that the World Bank has said that by 2050, their worst case scenario is that I think it's something like 200 million people will be forced to flee their homes because of the impacts of climate change. And those impacts will be felt by all of us through things like mass migratory flows, increased competition for resources. I don't think there's a world in which we can pretend that this is something we can ignore for much longer. And there will be decisions to take about all of this. And each country will take those decisions in their own way. But we need to be totally clear-eyed about the challenge we're facing, and we need to face it head on.
And so when you hear people still question whether or not a country like Canada, and of course this is given the fact that when you compare the greenhouse gases output of Canada up against countries like the United States, India, China, we pale by comparison. So there continues to be this argument that what Canada achieves will have such a small impact on on global GHG that it really shouldn't be a priority for us.
Well, I don't buy that argument, and let me tell you why. First of all, the countries that are facing the most immediate impacts from climate change are those that haven't really borne much responsibility for the emissions that have caused it, and so we have a responsibility to those countries. Second of all, I think we all know that do as I say, not as I do is not a good strategy internationally. And if we want to lead countries internationally on tackling the fight on climate change, we need to demonstrate leadership at home as well. And so I simply don't think it's plausible to say our emissions are such a small part of this that it isn't worth us doing anything. Overall, we need to achieve a change and we need to play our part in that.
And I think you touched upon it a bit before, but it's probably worthwhile to also talk about the economic benefit, because at the end of the day, economies will have to adapt.
Yeah, that's right. So, as you know, we have a new government in the UK. Keir Starmer was elected as our Prime Minister in July of this year, and he set out 5 missions for government. And one of the missions that he's set himself, or set for the country, is that we will be a clean energy superpower by 2030. And he's done that in part because there's a very clear need to do that in terms of the climate change argument, but also in part because he sees tremendous opportunity for economic growth in this. The reality is, this change is coming. The world is changing the energy sources that it uses and how it operates, and we can either be at the forefront of that, creating those high-skilled jobs, developing those technologies, and benefiting from the investment, twice as much money now invested in clean energy as is invested in fossil fuels, or we can be on the back end of it, and we can be takers of that technology. And we can be paying somebody else who's done the work for us. And I don't think it's in our interests to do that. And for those people who say the costs are too high, I'll just say that in the UK, we have reduced our emissions by 50% whilst growing our economy by 80% since 1990 levels. So this is possible. And if we see this as a growth opportunity, an opportunity to build economies of the future, then I believe it can be a positive for us.
So an economic opportunity as a result of climate change, as bad as that may be. You know, let's also talk about the other impact of what's happening in the north, because what's interesting is when I had the idea of sitting down and talking with you, it was because you and I met at the NATO anniversary.
That's right.
And you made mention of the fact that our security concerns are changing because of what's happening in the north. Can you build upon that?
Yeah, well, I think there's a number of concerns. I mean, it's specifically concerns related to climate change, which are most evident in the north. So, first of all, I would say that the Arctic, as we know, is warming 4 times faster than anywhere else in the world. And so scientists now predict that we're looking at a minimum sea level rise of 27 centimetres. That in itself is going to have security impacts, because that's going to cause all kinds of problems for countries around the world, some of which see their very future and existence threatened by that. Second of all, the Arctic is going to change because of the melting sea, and so the opening up of different routes, and that will lead to greater competition for resources. So 22% of the untapped oil reserves are in the Arctic, for example. And so we can certainly expect to see the Arctic, which has traditionally been an area of high collaboration, low conflict, move away from that. And we must ask ourselves, are we prepared for the Arctic to become somewhere where conflict is more present and more of a real threat?
Is that a specific reference to Russia or China?
Well, I don't know that we need to make references to specific countries. Russia obviously has very legitimate interests in the Arctic. It's an Arctic state. At the same time, there is increasing Russian military activity in the Arctic. They have re-established some of their Cold War era bases there, and so we would be right to be thinking about what that looks like and to be asking ourselves how we're going to really ensure that we're protecting ourselves. And in that sense, we were very pleased to see in Canada's Defence Policy Update a really strong focus on the Arctic, which I know was really welcomed by all of the allies.
And is that because that is the front that the allies see Canada essentially specializing in, given the fact that the UK and all of Europe are now facing Russian aggression on another front?
Well, that's right. So the point of an alliance is about burden sharing. We don't all need to do everything. And so within any alliance, we should think about how we're playing to our different strengths, different expertise. And Canada obviously has tremendous expertise in the Arctic. And so it's really welcome that the Defence Policy Update was really clear about this focus on the Arctic. And we look forward to seeing what that will mean over the next few years.
Mm-hmm. Look forward to seeing, and we did also hear from the Prime Minister here in Canada that the Trudeau government will meet the 2% commitment target of NATO.
Right.
Now, it's a path that's laid out between now and 2032, though. Is that time frame too long?
Well, so the first thing to say is we were really pleased that Canada committed to that 2% target. Now every single country in NATO is committed to hitting that 2% target, and indeed some are going further than that. And I think, we all recognise a few years ago, maybe, we thought the world was a slightly safer place, but it doesn't feel like that at the moment. I mean, if you're European, you're sitting in a part of the world where we're seeing war on our continent, and the threats are incredibly real, and so we all need to be really mindful. Now look, the reason to spend money on defence is not because any of us want to go to war. It's because having a good military preparation and defence is our best prospect of deterring war. It's our best prospect of maintaining peace. So you asked about 2032. I mean, it's a lot of money that needs to be spent to get there, and so there are just some realistic timeframes involved in this. And of course, it's important that any plan that Canada puts in place is a realistic one that's achievable. So I think we're just delighted that Canada's made that commitment, and we'll look forward to working with them on how it's delivered and doing anything we can to be helpful.
Work with Canada, and that brings to mind, for me, AUKUS, the military alliance that the UK has with the United States and Australia. Canada is not a part of that grouping. Canada has expressed desire to be a part of that grouping. Simultaneously, we've heard from the Prime Minister that Canada is thinking of acquiring, or in the process of acquiring, nuclear subs. Does that procurement have to happen first before Canada gets to be a member of AUKUS?
So there's 2 bits to AUKUS. There's the bit that is about nuclear submarines, which we call Pillar 1, and then there's Pillar 2, which is about advanced capabilities. And there's a lot of things in that bucket, so AI, quantum, those sorts of things, where Canada does have real areas of expertise. And I think that's the area that Canada has expressed some interest in. And indeed, I think that we've recently said that we would be interested in discussions with Canada on what might be possible under that Pillar 2 part of AUKUS.
Now, climate change, you noted it, is also causing mass migration around the world. So if we can circle back to that as well, because being where we are, on the one hand, Canada is a country built on immigration. We know that historically, but at the same time, I'm not entirely certain that Canadians are aware of the challenge that mass global migration will have on this country. How do you see Canada and the UK working on that front?
Well, at the moment, the migration that we're seeing in the context of climate change is mostly internal migration, people moving around within their countries because they're trying to move from areas of land that are no longer hospitable or where there simply isn't enough water to be able to, or other resources to be able to live the kind of lives that they were used to living. But that is going to change. Climate is going to affect where people live, the way people live, the global competition for resources. And so we do all need to be really mindful about that. And that's why some of the things that we're doing in the COP process, for example, is looking not just at how do we reduce emissions, but also how do we help countries that are already facing some of the challenges of climate? Because even if we succeed in keeping global warming to 1.5 degrees or even 2 degrees, we know that some of the effects of climate are now baked in. So working with countries who are on the front line of this, many of whom I said are in the global south or small island developing states, they are already seeing the impact of this. It's important for us to really think about how we're working with those countries to help them adapt to changes that are now baked in and inevitable. So there's a two-track process on this. We need to stop emissions rising any further, do what we can to limit that, preferably to 1.5 and at most to 2 degrees. But at the same time, we need to help those countries who are already facing the impact of this. And we see this in extreme weather events. So, for example, I mean, you've had a number of extreme weather events in Canada, but I was looking at the stats on this recently. 68 countries around the world since 2002 have had to call in their military to help with the response to extreme weather events because their emergency services have been overwhelmed and unable to cope with it. That trend is just going to get worse. And so, you know, asking ourselves some hard questions about how we're engaging with this, but also how we're helping those countries who are already facing some really serious challenges. Those things are things that the UK and Canada can really work on together. Mm-hmm.
And what about immigration? Yes, in terms of securing where people are right now, but when you look at the analysis of mass migration, it will create more immigration pressures for countries like the Canada and the UK. How do you see our two countries working on that matter together?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, our approach to that has been twofold. One, we recognise that we are a country that has an obligation to help those who are fleeing desperate situations overseas. So those who are fleeing persecution, who have legitimate asylum claims, for example, we have a process where we take those responsibilities very seriously. At the same time, we think that part of the purpose of our development programme that we have overseas, where we spend a good amount of money working with countries that have development needs. Part of the reason to do that is to make it, because people don't want to leave their countries, they want to stay where their homes are, where they've grown up, where their families are. And so part of the way that we think about development is how can we spend development money to help those countries that would like to be able to make the changes they need to make to stop mass migration. And that's not just about climate change. That's about creating the kind of economies that deliver good jobs for people. It's about security. It's about giving women and girls situations where they feel that they can thrive. All of these things are things that drive migration. And our approach has both been to make sure that we can offer safe haven to those who really need it, but also to work to ensure that those people who want to stay, we're investing money and working with countries to develop their countries so that they can do that. And we do that in partnership with those countries.
In terms of the challenges of integration, though, because Canada's had the challenges, the UK, sadly, we saw the attacks on migrants in the UK over the summer. How do the two countries work on that front together?
Well, I have to say, as somebody who is a visitor in your country, I have been very impressed with the way that Canada thinks about immigration. I love the way that you refer to new Canadians, and I think there's something very interesting about the Canadian model that you know is worth thinking about. You obviously have a lot of space here in Canada, so that makes it easier in some ways, although you have challenges around accommodation and access to public services that we all have. But I think we do both feel an obligation to provide safe haven. We've both, for example, taken in great numbers of people from Ukraine. We've both taken in numbers of people from Afghanistan as well. And it's, you know, it's right that we do that.
As we wrap up our conversation, I do want to also ask you what your advice would be to your successor, because that was not a question I was going to ask.
Yeah.
But of course, the news has changed since you and I began planning all this.
Yes. Gosh, it's a great question. I mean, mainly, when my job, in our system, the job is advertised and you have to apply for it. And when this job was advertised, there was a line of people out the door who want to come and do this job because it is unquestionably one of the best in the whole of our diplomatic service. So my successor will have no problem having a fabulous time here and doing some really interesting work. I think my one bit of advice, which perhaps it sounds a bit naive, but I've been here 3 years and this is a vast and beautiful country. And it's simply not possible in 3 years to see anywhere near as much of the country as I had hoped to see. So I think my advice to my successor would be start travelling really early on, get out of Ottawa. I couldn't do that because of the pandemic. So for the first 6 months, I couldn't travel. And so my advice to him would be get out on the road, get out of Ottawa, get out and see as many of the different provinces as you can, as much of this vast country, meet as many Canadians as you can, and really get a sense of what it means to be somewhere that is this vast, that is this beautiful, that is really this incredible. Talk to different Canadians and understand the different perspectives around the country. I really think, you know, I get to the end of my time here and think I've done a lot of that, but nowhere near as much as I would have liked to have done. There are still places that I'm sad to say I haven't made it to. So that I think would be my advice.
But does that mean we'll see you again on a visit?
Almost certainly. Almost certainly I'll be back here on holiday.
Well, we look forward to that. High Commissioner, I've enjoyed getting to know you. Thank you for this.
Thank you. And thanks for a great discussion today.
And that is our conversation with the UK's High Commissioner to Canada, Susannah Goshko, and we do wish her the very best in her next posting. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. We'll see you in our next edition of Profile.